On today's show, our next guest is a true example how everyone's transition is a truly unique individual story, and they are not afraid to have fun along the way, with being a producer of Queers of Joy and also being a stand-up comedian. Welcome to LGBTI Conversations, Chris Lani McAllister.
Hi, Anthony.
Pretty exciting stuff. You're the first non-binary person we've had on LGBTI Conversations to date. So, no pressure.
Oh, I represent the whole community.
This is good. Now, can you take us back to the time before you are where you are today, when you realised something wasn't quite right? You've thought, what I'm seeing in the mirror isn't how I'm feeling inside.
Well, actually, that was only a couple of years ago. I'm 40 now. I spent 20 odd years out as a lesbian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was my identity, and I've always been what you would call a tomboy, and that was never a problem. No one was telling me not to be. When I was young, I was allowed to be however I wanted to be, and it wasn't that I would say that I felt like a boy or felt anything like that. I did have a number of people ask if I was a boy or a girl when I was young. I'd go to the park just wearing shorts and no top, just because that was just normal for me. Or, all my friends were boys. I played football, as in soccer. And I used to go to swimming lessons, and the swimming teacher asked my older sister to ask our mum to get me to wear a proper bathing costume, because I just used to wear the trunks. So, yeah, it was never a problem for me. It was other people that were couldn't place me. And it was only when I got to the age of 11 that it bothered me that people asked, and it started to embarrass me. And I remember being in primary school, and we'd been sent to another school to read to 5-year-olds for the afternoon. And this 5-year-old said, "Are you a boy or a girl?" Which baffled me at the time, because I was wearing a girl's school uniform. And my teacher would have been nearby, and I think I must have been quite fond of my teacher. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, I hope she didn't hear that, because I was so embarrassed that I'd been asked that question. And I remember that being the first time that it actually started to bother me. I remember I had a paper round, and I used to do a lot of thinking on my paper round. I used to have half an hour, 45 minutes every morning of me just doing the same paper round every day, being on my bike. And I was getting very used to delivering the papers. I was alone with my own thoughts. And I remember thinking that I thought I might be a lesbian. I don't know if that was the word I would have thought at the time, but I liked girls. And then I'd heard something like, a lot of people go through that phase. And I remember thinking, it could be a phase, because it excited me in a way. Anyway, I think I just put that down for a while. And then I fell in love with a friend of mine when I was about 15, I think. And we used to spend all our time together. She had a boyfriend, but I just was completely besotted with her for a couple of years. I came out to my friends when I was 17, came out to my mum when I was 18, and lived that way till about the age of 38, so a couple of years ago. And I guess I just had started to be, I've always been a bit androgynous, but I think I'd started to be a bit more comfortable being sort of masculine, more on the masculine side of androgyny. And I had started to do a bit of drag king performance. One evening, I had sort of emulated George Michael, I suppose. I had a 5 o'clock shadow. It's actually a medley of his songs. And I'd come home that night, and I walked past the mirror and saw myself. And for a moment, there was a guy looking back at me, and it was just a really odd feeling, which later could have been described as gender euphoria. I hadn't really heard of the term at that point. And then from there, I started to look at my body, my breasts, for instance, and I was like, they just look really weird on me. They look like they shouldn't be there, that someone's just stuck them on there. And so that's kind of how I started this journey into exploring my gender. But it's a new thing. It hasn't been something that I've examined throughout my whole life or anything like that.
That's very interesting. And also, you were saying when you were growing up too, that being different or just being yourself, no one really picked up on it until you were about 11, and even your parents and all that were pretty cool with, you being you. What time period are we talking here, like the 80s or?
Yes, I was born in 82. I'm from a town in England, which is not too far from Liverpool. It's like a seaside town, sort of lower middle class. I mean, I'd say privileged background in a way. So it was like sort of just relaxed. Yeah, my mom has always been someone that she's got 4 kids, sort of, I'm the second oldest. Kids are all really different from each other, and she doesn't sort of ever tell us what to do or kind of get in the way or anything like that. So that was just how it was.
That's pretty refreshing considering the period too, like the 80s. There was a lot going on within the LGBTI community anyway. But then to be able to be free to do what you want, you know, growing up and your parents not putting you in a box, that was pretty special within itself, it sounds.
Yeah, and also though, I just don't think it was on their radar because I remember it was in the background of like Section 28, which was the law in English schools that meant that teachers weren't allowed to talk about homosexuality in school. I don't know if you know about that here. It was something that only got repealed, I don't know how many years ago, but really late, like in the day when you think about how far we've come with gay rights and stuff. But I remember that being in the news and stuff in the background. I don't think my mom saw me being a tomboy as anything to do with sexuality. It was just part of my personality that I like to play football. So she didn't make that mean anything that, oh, this must be a lesbian that I'm raising or a trans boy or something like that. It was taken with a pinch of salt.
So it was about age 11. People started to kind of go, well, or act more like a little girl or a young lady than a tomboy?
No, I still continue to have all my friends be boys and play football, and I was quite sporty. I mean, back in the day when we were kind of still wearing skirts at school, there wasn't really much of a choice with that. But I think that I did go through a little phase of when I was about 16, I think, and we started to go out into town, and girls could get into bars underage, but boys couldn't around that. I don't know what it's like now without ID. I used to go out with my sister who's 2 years older than me, go out dancing and stuff. And so it was so binary the way people dressed, like girls wore skirts, boys wore pants, you know, that kind of thing. And so I just went along with what the expectation was. So there was like, there'll be pictures of me wearing probably my older sister's clothes and stuff because I didn't really have anything. Or really daggy, like maybe I had sort of got myself a skirt or something like black with a bit of lace or something like that. Like just looks really crazy on me really, because I was so kind of boyish and androgynous looking anyway. So it just looks like I'm wearing drag. But yeah, I just kind of conformed that way. And that only lasted, say, a year and a half, because once I got to sixth form college, which is like where you go after you finish high school, finishes at the age of 16, you can go off to college for 2 years. So it's like a different ball game to high school. It's like you meet a whole new set of people, you finish high school, you have more independence, people are driving to college. You don't necessarily have to be there from 9 till 3 like you did at school. You just go in for your lessons. So it's different. And no one ever talked about anyone being gay at school. It just wasn't a thing that people even thought about. Like, it just wasn't an option. And then when I got to college, it was like, oh, there's people who are gay, there's people who are dressed differently, you know, there's artistic people, it was a lot more freedom. And that's when I started to explore properly and have friends that I actually could feel safe to come out to and say for the first time, oh yeah, I think I'm gay, knowing that they would have no issue with it, and it wouldn't be like a subject to be teased about like it would have been at school. Like it would have been completely unheard of for anyone to come out as gay at our high school.
So you'd say you'd felt a lot freer in college now? People are open-minded here. There's people that I can kind of look at and go, yeah, I can see myself and move forward?
Yeah, it was like a leap into young adulthood from kind of just like young teenager. It was kind of like that, like a bit more of the real world and a bit more freedom to be who you are. And, you know, it's not that everyone would have been accepting, but you can find your enclave of people and you find the people that will be accepting. Whereas in high school, it felt like it was more of a homogenous group of people that you kind of had to conform into that.
It'd be the late 90s we're talking about here.
We're talking probably 99, 2000. So Yeah, it was in the era of like Ellen coming out on her show. There was a little bit happening in mainstream. I never felt like unsafe being gay. Like, I think because of the town that I grew up in, that it felt safe to me.
Yeah.
So I think I'm lucky, like, geographically where I was brought up as well.
So fast forward, you're walking by the mirror, you're dressed as Elvis drag, and you think, wait a minute, I like what I see here. So talk us through the next step after that.
Yeah, so that happened. So I started to talk to my wife about it. My wife is Danica Lani, and she is the most supportive, accepting, like just loving partner you could ever want, and safe space for me to talk about how I was feeling. And so I kind of sat on it for a bit and researched and read and went forwards and backwards. Okay, so I've got these feelings about my body. What do I want to do about it? What does it mean? Identity, all of these labels, words, it was confusing. And so then I approached a gender like counselor through a gender center, and we had a few sessions, and she would ask questions like just about identity, and I suppose those kinds of questions more murky in the water. It was like there's not really any language appropriate for what I'm feeling, and that's just kind of not really helping. So anyway, my wife and we've got this spot in Maroubra on the cliff. It's like 180 degrees of ocean, and it's like our favorite place in Sydney to go and have D&M. And we were sitting there one afternoon and talking about it. What do I want to do about it? And I realized sitting on the cliff that I had all these opinions about like tampering with my body, like plastic surgery. I've always been someone that has been pretty au natural. And I realized that was stopping me from moving forward, that I had this kind of opinion of, and maybe I should just like appreciate what I've got and live with what I have. And also because I know about the narrative of like trans people knowing since they were 2 years old, hating their bodies, being like feeling like they've been born in the wrong body, all of this stuff. And that's not how I felt, that maybe I was making it all up. Maybe it was just all in my head. I don't know. Like, I couldn't understand why it wasn't fitting into any of these narratives that I'd heard before, which is at the age of 38, like I've decided that I just don't think that my breasts suit me. But it's not causing me anxiety to the point where I can't leave the house, and I'm not depressed, and, I don't hate my body. I don't hate myself. All of these things were telling me I must be making it up. But sitting on the cliff and just having that big conversation and realizing that I had these opinions, and Danica said, well, just try and put all of those things aside for a moment and put what you think other people might say aside. What do you want? Like, if you're looking at yourself in the future, what do you see? And I was like a chest, like a masculine chest, and maybe like not a beard, but like stubble. And well, she was like, okay, well, there you go then. And so that's when I was like, okay, then I know what I want to do next. And so I went down the path of going to see the GP and the informed consent, and going to see the psychologist, all the things that you tick, boxes that you have to tick to go down the path, and then and save for a year and a half, and eventually had my surgery to remove the breast, masculinize the chest, and really happy with that. And it's been 2.5 years now since I've been on testosterone, and happy with that as well. And I thought to myself, I changed my pronouns to they, them. And I thought, I don't know whether they'll end on he, him, or what will happen there. Let's just do this and see what happens. And then as people who I meet assume male, now when they meet me, that's how people read me. And I realized that actually that doesn't fit either. He, him isn't how I feel. I don't feel like a guy. So not that I correct strangers on the street, like, I'll just deal with that in the fleeting moment. So I say non-binary trans masc, for want of a better word, but gender neutral terms kind of really sit well with me, even though I still get, she from people who've known me for a while, or he from people who have only just met me. I just kind of, what I'm practicing is not being bothered by any of it, just being like water off a duck's back.
And I think you've got to be like that, because you probably do find people when they first meet you, or they've known you for a long time, they automatically freeze and not sure how to move forward. Do you find that happens a bit?
Yeah, it really just depends who I'm with, what context I'm in. So if it's family, my family is mostly in England, and we've just had a holiday for my mum's 70th. We went to Spain, all my sisters, their families, and my mum, and my wife, and my 7-year-old daughter, who is brilliant at it, by the way. She can do multiple different pronouns for different people so quickly and easily. It is an age thing, I think. But my family slip up, and but most, they're getting it now, but they don't see me very often, so it's hard for them to practice, I suppose. They're so laid back, and I'm a laid back person as well, that I just don't make them wrong for getting it wrong, repeatedly. It's just like a language thing. It's like a knee-jerk thing sometimes. And I know none of it's intentional, so it doesn't bother me at all. And, sometimes I'll just correct each other. I don't even have to say anything.
Let them do it.
Or my 7-year-old will. She's like, it's they, Nana.
And you're right about the younger generation, like you were saying, your 7-year-old. They just know. They're so far ahead of us, and it doesn't faze them. You could be anything now, and they just run with it, and they don't even give it a second thought. And it's good to see that, the fights that we've had over the generations, for the younger generation now to think, yeah, you're human, you're this, you're that, you're part of the LGBTIQ plus family. Who cares? Let's just get on with it. Yeah,
and my daughter Estelle, trying to explain to her that homosexuality used to be illegal, and she was like, what? It completely shocked her, because she just couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
I mean, she's quite young, but one day I'll explain the whole thing. Yeah, it's just what she's born into. It's just the water that she swims in, that it's all out in the open and free, and there's rainbows everywhere. We live near Newtown in Sydney, and so we're constantly going past rainbow flags or trans pride flags, and she always goes, look, there's the gender flag.
And that's good to see.
Or she gets excited if there's gender neutral toilets in a place, so.
Wow, that is great to see. Yeah. Also, you're the producer of Queers of Joy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Queers of Joy, performance night in Sydney. We go every 2 months. All the performers are trans, gender diverse, non-binary, gender non-conforming performers. And the idea was, I wanted to create this night, and I wanted to bring community together. And it was something I thought of after the first lockdown that we had for COVID. At the end of 2020, that we had the idea. And so the first show was December 2020. And in that show, I'd only just sort of gone on this journey of thinking about my own gender. I hadn't started testosterone yet. I hadn't shortened my name to Chris. I was still using she, her pronouns. And I thought, if I'm going on this journey, I'm going to bring a whole community along with me. And so the first few shows, I was giving updates about where I was. And the second show, which was 2 months after the first show, I just started testosterone. And the third show, my voice had started to deepen, all the different things. I wrote in a couple of people who I'd met along the way performing. So Gabriel Gerard, who's a drag king, Malika Mfame, who's a singer and guitarist. So they co-produced with me. And then my wife, Danica, she coaches the drag kings that perform at each of our shows. And we're over 2.5 years old now. And one of the amazing things that we do is that we have each performance, and then after the performance, we interview them for 5 minutes afterwards. And it just is that extra step to get to know the performer that you might not see at other kind of drag cabaret style nights. And what it creates is this beautiful space where the audience, there's no sort of gap between the audience and the performer. It's like someone's holding their arms around the whole venue. And usually there's love kind of just dripping off the walls, and like, it's just so uplifting and supportive. Yeah. And it started off as a kind of just a little project that I thought I'd do. And I didn't realize that I would spend so much of my time thinking about it, because creating the next show. But it's been great. So I co-host it with my co-producers. I had started doing stand-up comedy back in 2018. So now I get to just do some comedy whilst I'm on stage, which is really great for me, because I want to show like trans people thriving as much as possible. I want to show trans people being joyful and laughing and being in a community. I want to show all aspects of being trans. It's not just about the suffering and the pain and people not understanding and the pronouns. We're well-rounded individuals who have lives and jobs and creative pursuits and can have fun and can make jokes and laugh and all of those things. So it's become more than just a show every 2 months, and taken my life into many different places. Like, you know, I'm now on the board of Trans Pride Australia through that, and, you know, being asked to speak on various like corporate events and things, on Wear It Purple Day, etc., and interviewed for ABC, SBS, various things. I'm now the non-binary spokesperson whenever they need a quote that includes something to do with non-binary people or something like that. So it's been really good fun, and long may it continue, and see how it grows. And what I would love is it to be possible for a show like this to be anywhere in the world, because right now it's not possible. There are many places that you can't go to a show that celebrates trans and gender diverse people and their vitality. I just want to keep spreading the joy, and hope that one day it can be experienced by people wherever they live.
Tell me how you got into doing stand-up. How did that come to be?
I don't even know if I've been thinking about it. I've always thought of myself as a funny person. I've always been cracking jokes in conversation and stuff like that. And it's been important to me for people to relate to me as a funny person. And it's just, you know, I like to make people laugh. And then back then, there was a night on in Sydney that were asking for performers, and they put a call out on Facebook. I answered the call and I said, I would like to do some stand-up comedy, like just out of nowhere. I don't know why I did that, but I must have been ready to just do something creative. So I said, I'd like to do some stand-up comedy. And they were like, great. And then it was about 2 months later was the show, and I'd written like 7 minutes of material, a lot about being a lesbian, some about being English. Then I performed it, and it was at a lesbian event. Really well. I was the most nervous I'd ever been in my whole life. Before I got up on stage, I was just like almost hyperventilating. And then when I got on stage, I opened my mouth to speak, and this noise came out that was not words, and I'd never made a noise like it. And it was like this, I don't know what happened. Anyway, so I just had to kind of go like that and sort of breathe it out, take a deep breath, and start again. But it went really well. It got recorded. I put it up on YouTube and stuff. And then I was like, great, I've done that. That was enjoyable. And then I left it for 10 months, didn't do a thing with it. But then I picked it back up again 10 months later. I did a 5-week stand-up comedy course here in Sydney. What you were supposed to do was supposed to buy your own ticket to your own like final show that you had spent the 5 weeks creating your 5 minutes of material. And I'd missed the deadline, and the guy that was running the course was a bit of a douchebag about it. And I just was like, okay, fine, I've missed the deadline. I won't come to my own like thing. So what I did was I found this stand-up comedy night at the time called What She Said, which was run by Naomi Mora, who you've also spoken to on one of your episodes. And I contacted them, and they were at a newcomers night. And I said, oh, can I perform? And it was the same night as I was supposed to do this guy, but I missed out on buying the ticket. And they were like, yes, great, we've got a spot available. So it was like that Sunday. And then I was like, fantastic. Anyway, a few days later, the guy said, oh, it's okay, you can still come. And I said, oh, well, it's too late now. I've already got myself another gig. And I'm so glad I did, because their show had to get like 60 people in the audience. And it was a weekly comedy show. And it was the only one like it at the time where it was all women lineup. And so it was a really warm, lovely audience. So a really perfect space to perform in. So I went and did that show and had a great time, and the set went really well. And it was a lot of newer material that I hadn't done from that first one. And it was a lot more polished. And so I ended up performing quite a few times at that night that year, and obviously met Naomi and became really good friends with her. So that's been a gift as well from buying the ticket to my own graduation. So yeah, I got into it that year, and then did a lot in 2019 around and about a lot of queer comedy nights and stuff, and really was enjoying it and stuff. And then that's when we got locked down for COVID. And so a few gigs cancelled, and then it took me ages to get back to doing a set, because I'd been doing Queers of Joy where no one is expecting me to do comedy. I'm just hosting. So when I do a few jokes, it's a great bonus that they laugh. I'm not doing it for an audience that's going, come on, make us laugh. They're not here for a comedy night. So it took me a while to get back on the horse. But I did do one recently, and it was the first time I'd done one since being on testosterone, since presenting differently. And so some of my jokes, I was like, oh, well, they're dated now. I can't do stuff about being a lesbian because I don't it's just not going to fly. But I just adjusted them slightly, which has worked. And so I've been really enjoying getting back into doing comedy and doing it through the different kind of lens of being a trans, non-binary person, being read as a woman, or a lesbian, and now being in these shoes. So there's more material there.
It's very strange that the teacher said you couldn't come to your own show because you didn't buy a ticket. Like, that's comedian in itself.
I know, and he was a strange man. The irony is that show was only for the people who were in the course plus whoever they brought. And there was only 4 of us in the course. So it would have been a tiny audience anyway, and it would have been super awkward for your second show.
Yeah.
And for me to have swapped that with a full house of really warm audience with a bunch of newcomers, it's like chalk and cheese. Like, it could have been the breaking of me because it would have been so not enjoyable. Because you've got like 8 people in the audience, and they all quiet laughers or silent laughers, which you do get, like people who don't laugh out loud, then yeah, you're screwed because you don't know whether people are laughing or not.
That's so true. So he done you a favour in the end.
Exactly. Thank you. Whatever his name was, I've forgotten his name, but thank you.
Now, you did talk briefly about your marriage now with Denica. Tell me how you guys met.
We actually met being backup drag kings for a mutual friend. So it was after I'd done that first stand-up comedy gig for the lesbian night. And in that night, I had met a drag king who was performing that night called That Guy Steve. And they were doing another show, and they put a call out saying, I need some backup dancers for this idea I've got. I'm doing a parody of Neil Diamond's September Morn, but it's going to be 70s porn. Would anyone like to be a backup dancer? And I was just like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I was just saying yes to everything at the time. I'd never done like any drag or anything like that. And I'm not a dancer either. And so I went to their house one Saturday afternoon to workshop this performance, and there was Danica in the room. Yeah, we hit it off straight away. I was, cracking jokes. She was laughing, full of the good things when you first meet someone. And we ended up getting the train back towards the city together. And, there's 3 seats like all next to each other on the train. And she sat by the window, and I thought, do I leave a gap between us, or do I sit right next to her? I was like, I'll just sit right next to her.
And that person.
And I just remember enamored by her straight away, was into her. wasn't sure if it was reciprocated, but we took the train back and parted ways. And then we met up at the next rehearsal a week later. And we just had so much fun as a group and the two of us together as well. And then at the end of that rehearsal, again, parted ways. And then later on, she texted me like an outfit kind of idea. And we text back and forth for a while. And then after a while, I said, hey, do you want to go out after the next rehearsal? So it was after 3 rehearsals, we went on our first date. So yeah, it didn't take much, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, so we've been together ever since.
Wow. There you go. You find your life partner in interesting ways.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great way to start a relationship, doing something that you really love together, and having an excuse to see each other again every week is also a good thing.
Now, when you're not doing Queers of Joy or doing stand-up or doing all the other things that you do, you actually own a coffee shop. Now, you were saying it was an interesting story that a customer came in and they said, oh, does a lady still work here? And you said, oh, no. Tell us about that. That was quite interesting.
They said, oh, how long have you been here? I said, a few years. And they said, because I was here last time and I don't think that you were here, or something like that. And I said, oh, they said, I think it was like a lady running it. And I said, oh, yeah, that was probably me. And then I just left it at that and just left them to kind of work it out.
Did he work it out?
I mean, probably. I mean, no, they're a videographer and they come back now and again to do work there. So I do see them. I just say, oh, hey, how you doing?
It's interesting, isn't it? Just people's perception, you know, a lot of people think stuff, but they'll never say it. But then you get these people who just say left of wing stuff and you're like, okay, where do I go with this? Am I going to make you sound like an idiot that you are by telling you? You know what I mean? Or you just got to leave it?
Yeah, I mean, I would have left it then. And the reason I said that was because it was Trans Visibility Day or something.
Oh, really?
And so and so I was like, because I'm pretty privileged, I'm white, I'm trans masc, I pass, not that I necessarily want to pass as cis or anything like that, but I have the choice. I'm not a walking target when I walk out the door, so I can blend into the crowd if I want to. So it's choice is a privilege. And so I felt a responsibility to be visible. And even though that's not, I mean, it's a tiny, tiny action, but it's like the more actions I take in that way of being visible, the more lots of people do it. There'll be a tipping point to how people perceive trans people. Danica and I last year went to Fiji for a week's holiday, and I got stopped at the airport at Fiji because they'd x-rayed the bags as we got in, and there was a sex toy in there. There was a dildo in there, and which is usually would be hilarious. But so they took me aside behind this wall in a private area and were opening up, and I didn't know why they'd taken me aside. I didn't know what the problem was. So I said to be kind to this woman, so she didn't get a shock. I said, just so you know, there's a sex toy in there. She said, oh, you're not allowed sex toys. And I was like, what? I was shocked. Didn't realize.
Really?
It's apparently it's an obscene object. It's under that headline. So she's pointed out the piece of paper on the wall that says no firearms, no blah, 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 no obscene object.
I've never seen a picture on the airport wall with a dildo on it saying no dildos on bag.
Neither. No.
Yeah, that's they've got to update that, I think. So this was carry-on baggage, I take?
No, this was once you arrived at the airport.
Oh, really?
This was
like custom.
They x-ray your bag, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah. And my passport still says female on it, still got my birth name, and also this passport that I had was 9 years old, so it had a picture of me when I'm from 9 years ago.
Right.
And so, I mean, it looks like me, but it would take you a few seconds to go, okay, it's really the same person. Anyway, so So she's like, you're not allowed a sex toy. And I was like, I didn't realize. Anyway, so she pulls out this other thing, which is called a stand to pee device. People assigned female at birth who are transitioning and they're going to the male toilet, they might use that so they can use the urinal. And it looks like a penis. So Danica had got it me for Christmas and it was quite expensive. So she picked this one up as well. And I said, that's not a sex toy. That's a stand to pee device. And I was explaining. And I said, so she was so confused because she thought she was looking at a cis man. And I was like, I'm not a man. I don't have a penis. And this is why I need this. And she just could not understand, put it together. She's looking at my passport. She's like, whose is this passport? I was like, it's mine. It's me. And she brought over her male supervisor because she just didn't know what to do about this whole thing. And he's asking, I have to explain all over again. I don't have a penis. So I'm feeling very uncomfortable at this point in time. If it was just me being a lesbian, bringing a sex toy and them confiscating that, then I probably would have been annoyed, but also like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. But then just because of that, having to explain my anatomy to these people, I just felt really uncomfortable. Then she said, we don't have transgender people here.
Wow.
So, which is obviously not true. But in her world, it's true. And the man who was really grumpy was asking me for proof that I was trans because I didn't have any medication with me. I don't like testosterone because I'd had an injection that lasted for 3 months, so you didn't need it. And I was explaining that. So they were asking me for proof. So I had to dig out an email that was from my psychologist that said, yes, Chris is, has gender dysphoria. So I had to show them that. So thank goodness I had that. So this was all just so I could keep the stand to pee device, and they only confiscated the dildo, which they took, and they would not keep it for when we were on our way back. And it was just like, the looks that we were getting from the various staff, and that was our arrival in Fiji. And I had not had top surgery at the time, and so I just felt really vulnerable. And so nothing against Fiji at all, but it was just an uncomfortable situation for me being in a new place that I wasn't sure how it was going to work for the rest of the week, where people were looking at my face, seeing a guy, but then I've got breasts. Anyway, my point being that I realized the privilege that I have living in a country like Australia, being from England, living in Sydney, for goodness sake, able to have a show that celebrates queerness and transness. All of that, I can be visible. Whereas in a place like Fiji, people are not even visible. This woman doesn't even realize that there are trans people in the country. That's how invisible they are.
I don't realize there's parts of the world still that are like that. And they do not believe there's only one sex, heterosexual, and that's it. It's crazy to think. We do forget about it for sure.
Yeah, well, that was a big fat reminder. And it just had me go, okay, well, I have this responsibility to be visible where I can, because if we don't do that, then it's going to take even longer for other places to get to that point of visibility. Like, we don't just have visibility here. We're beyond visibility, but in other places that they don't have that. So that's why I said that to that person in the cafe, but I mean, not a huge deal, but, and that's why I put videos out on Instagram and stuff about being trans, just to humanize being trans, that it's not a statistic, it's not all of the fear mongering that you see in the news, it's not people trying to convert people into being trans, it's not predatory behavior trying to get children to be trans, it's just people living their lives and just being normal people.
And I feel at the moment too, especially in Australia, we're at that tipping point where we're nearly across the line. We're nearly there. There is still issues and they jump up here and there. But do you feel that it is getting much, much better here in Australia opposed to other countries like Fiji?
It's definitely a lot better here. I don't know. I would look at places like America and the UK who seem to be peeling back some of the laws and the equality and stuff like that. And it's just, luckily, for some reason, it seems to have not made it over here. Like, they're closing gender clinics in the UK and, you know, creating laws to make it nigh on impossible for people to get gender affirming therapy under the age of 18 and stuff like that. So it seems to be here that there's a bit more level headedness and less irrationality. I don't know why, but maybe it's just geography. I think it seems to be a pretty safe space in the most part here. And I'm talking about in the cities. I don't know what it's like when you're, you know, in a rural place here, because I don't live there. That's not my experience.
And that's the other thing too. It's about, you were saying they were shutting down the clinics over in the UK and stuff like that. But to do a transition smoothly, you really need to, for the younger generation who for sure know that they're in the wrong body, is to start it before puberty, to get in there and make it as natural and normal as possible for their lives, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways that you can affirm someone who's going through that, whether it be a social transition, whether it be puberty blockers, whatever it is, and that's right for the individual child. And yeah, I would say look at it all case by case basis rather than making blanket laws against everything. I think so. Leave it to the experts as well who are in this field, rather than every Tom, Dick or Harry having an opinion on something that they've got absolutely no experience with. Like, how would you know what it's like to question your gender if you've never questioned it? Why do you need to have an opinion on that?
Exactly. The old saying, live and let live.
Oh, I'm constantly saying live and let live. I'm shocked by how many people don't live by that. I think that people think that they live by that. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm just live and let live. And it's like, except when it comes to this, like, it baffles me. The comments that I get on social media are just so baffling that people like come along and go and tell me what to do. It's like, I'm 40 years old. Like, what difference does it make what I do in my life with the people who love me, who are all fine with how I choose to live my life? Why do you care, like, person who I've never met before? Like, it's really bizarre.
And there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there. And, you know, it says more about that individual person that's saying stuff like that than it does about the person they're saying it to, because they're the ones who are obviously struggling with their own issues, and they feel that to help them, they've got to put down other people, which is sad to see. But, you know, it's one of those things where you need to just go, well, that's your problem, not mine.
It really doesn't bother me because I don't take it personally. When they're sort of saying what they're saying, it's like, really got nothing to do with me. And I will respond sometimes if, like, we can have a conversation, because, you know, if I can change someone's mind through just dialogue, not arguing, then great. And there was someone recently who did come on to one of my posts and say something like, you can't be, you've got to be this or that. I can't remember exactly what they said. It was a bit insulting. And I said something like, well, my wife, my family, my friends all use gender neutral language for me. And they're all fine with it. And that's just how, like, I like to be referred to. What's actually wrong with that? And then they came back and said, nothing, actually. I'm really sorry. And I was like, what? And they said I shouldn't have said what I said in the first place. I'm really sorry. I was like, wow, that's super powerful.
Well, yeah, it's refreshing to see people actually own what they say and apologise when they realise that they're out of order. And I suppose it's education too, isn't it?
Yeah, and the way that I see education for me is just to explain how it is for me. I don't know how it is for all the other trans people out there, because we don't all have the same experience. So I can just say, this is how it is for me, and that's that. And then just personalize my experience so that people can see that my experience is just a human experience, just like they have their own human experiences. And if they want to argue with that, then obviously there's nowhere to go from that. But I'm not going to argue with statistics and, you know, you're wrong because of this, because I'm just not going to get anywhere. And it's going to be futile and really frustrating. So I'd rather just go, well, look, this is how it is for me. what's up with that? And, you know, most people either just go away or they can't really come back with any animosity, because I'm not fighting fire with fire. So it's really good to disarm people like that as well.
What's the old saying? If you don't run, they can't chase you.
That's a good one.
Now, if you could go back and tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Keep playing football. Also, don't bother with that shame, because it's just a complete wasted emotion.
Wow, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on LGBTI Conversations today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you love listening to LGBTI Conversations, make sure to follow. This will help other people find us much easier. And also, make sure that you never miss out on an episode. Thanks for listening to LGBTI Conversations with me, Anthony Doik.